Ladies and gentlemen, we gather not to mourn dust and ashes, but to decipher an echo, to contemplate not merely an event, but an epoch's long, slow exhale, the fall of the Roman Empire. It is a subject that has haunted the Western imagination for 15 centuries, a grand and tragic opera where the stage is the known world, and the actors are legions, emperors, barbarians, and saints. It is not a simple tale of a city sacked. It is a symphony of collapse, with many movements, each playing its part in the unraveling of antiquity's greatest tapestry. Let us first dispel the romance of a single cataclysm. Rome did not fall in a day, nor at the swords of a single horde. The year 476, when the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus was deposed, is but a punctuation mark, a period in a long, declining sentence. The true fall was a process, a creeping twilight lasting centuries, visible only in hindsight. To understand it is to understand the fragility of civilization itself, a complex organism succumbing to 1,000 fevers. Our story must begin not at the end, but at the peak. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, was an unprecedented miracle of order. From the mists of Britain to the sands of Syria, one law, one road, one vision held sway. It was built on mighty pillars, the invincible legions, a sophisticated system of law and administration, an engine of economics that fed a million souls in the self, and a unifying civic ideology. Rome was not just a city, it was an idea. Civis Romanus sum, I am a Roman citizen, was the most powerful passport in the world, yet within this zenith lay the seeds of twilight. The first cracks were institutional. The crisis of the 3rd century saw the empire fragment, only by iron-willed soldier emperors like Aurelian. In response, Diocletian and Constantine remade the state, but at a cost. They split the empire for easier management, creating an eastern and a western half a division that would become a fatal rift. They bound farmers to their land and sons to their fathers' professions, ossifying a vibrant economy into a rigid system. To pay for a vast, top-heavy bureaucracy and a forever army, taxes became crushing, strangling the very middle class that had been the empire's backbone. Wealth fled to the countryside, into the fortified villas of the powerful, who owed less loyalty to a distant emperor than to their own estates. This was the quiet internal rot, the hollowing out of civic responsibility, the transformation of free citizens into burdened subjects. And what of the guardians? The legions, once the fierce repository of Roman virtue, changed. As the population aged and citizen soldiers grew scarce, Rome increasingly looked beyond its borders for its defenders. Goths, Huns, and Sarmatians were recruited en masse. They fought for pay, not for Rome. The very definition of Roman became diluted. At the same time, the nature of threat transformed. The disciplined phalanxes of Carthage or Macedon were gone. Now, from the vastness of the Eurasian steppe, came mobile, swift, and utterly merciless horsemen, the Huns. They were a shock to the system, a force of nature that pushed entire tribes of Goths, crashing against the Roman frontiers not as raiders, but as desperate nations on the move. Here, Rome faced a tragic dilemma. It could no longer annihilate these migrating peoples. It could only hope to manage them. The policy of hospitalitas, settling barbarian foederati within the empire's borders, was a desperate gamble. It brought short-term soldiers but long-term strife. These communities, like the Visigoths, retained their own laws, their own commanders, and a simmering sense of grievance when promises of land and food were broken. The relationship was one of mutual dependence and profound distrust. The empire had become a house sharing rooms with strangers it could not control. We cannot overlook the spiritual revolution from within. From the catacombs to the throne, Christianity rose. This was more than a change of gods. The old Roman religion was intrinsically tied to the state. To sacrifice to Jupiter was to affirm loyalty to Rome. Christianity introduced a higher, competing allegiance to God and to a church that transcended imperial borders. While it eventually became a unifying force, the long transition eroded the pagan ideological glue of the state. Moreover, the new faith's focus on the afterlife and its suspicion of worldly glory, as voiced by thinkers like Augustine, subtly turned attention away from the mortal project of preserving earthly Rome. The city of man was now in the shadow of the city of God, and through it all, the relentless, grinding pressure of chaos. The Western Empire became a map of bleeding borders. In 410, the unthinkable. Alaric the Visigoth sacked Rome itself. The shockwave rippled across the world. St. Jerome wrote, "The city which had taken the whole world was itself taken." Then, in 455, the Vandals gave us our vocabulary for mindless destruction. Each blow was psychological as much as physical. The tax base of the wealthy provinces in Gaul, Spain, and Africa was stripped away, one after another. The Western Emperor in Ravenna became a puppet, his strings pulled by barbarian magistri militum like Ricimer, who made and unmade rulers at will. The army was now a patchwork of tribal warbands. The Senate was a hollow relic. By 476, when Odoacer, a Germanic chieftain, deposed Romulus Augustulus, it was merely an administrative formality. The West had already ceased to function as a coherent imperial state. It had shattered into a mosaic of barbarian kingdoms: Visigothic Spain, Vandal Africa, Frankish Gaul, and Odoacer's Italy. The imperial regalia were sent east to Constantinople, a symbolic admission that there was now only one Roman emperor, and he reigned from the Bosporus, not the Tiber. Why did the East survive as the Byzantine Empire for another 1,000 years? The contrast is instructive. The East was richer, more urbanized, with shorter, more defensible borders. Its linguistic and cultural unity, Greek, was stronger. Its emperors, like the formidable Justinian, managed crises with fewer simultaneous catastrophes. The West, poorer, more agrarian, and with the vast, porous frontier of the Rhine and Danube, bore the brunt of the migratory storm. It was the weaker limb, and it broke. So, what is the legacy of this fall? It was not an apocalypse of darkness, as Renaissance thinkers believed. The barbarian kingdoms often desperately tried to preserve Roman law and infrastructure. The Church emerged as the sole repository of literacy and administration, a thin but vital thread stretching across the chaos. The dream of Rome never died. It morphed. It lived on in Charlemagne's Holy Roman Empire, in the papacy, in the legal codes of Europe, and in the very ideal of a universal order. Therefore, the fall of Rome is not a mystery of a single cause. It was not merely barbarian invasions, or Christian piety, or lead pipes, or moral decay. It was all these, a perfect storm. It was the failure of institutions to adapt, the collapse of economic resilience, the erosion of a unifying identity, and the overwhelming of a complex system by internal rigidity and external shock. It teaches us that civilization is not a permanent possession, but a continuous act of maintenance, of renewal, and of willing defense. It shows that an empire can be hollowed out from within long before its walls are breached from without. In the end, Rome's greatest lesson may be in its silence. It reminds us that no order, however magnificent, is eternal, that the pillars of law, shared citizenship, economic justice, and civic virtue must be constantly tended. As we look upon our own complex, interconnected, and anxious world, the ghost of Rome whispers not of inevitability, but of choice. It asks what we value, what we are willing to defend, and what, in the end, we wish to preserve when the long twilight finally comes. Thank you.